Hello, it's Cried here, with an update video for Elden Ring's patch 1.12 notes. I will be going over the changes made rather than the new things added in the DLC. The patch notes has many mistakes, so do listen carefully to where the patch notes are wrong. I won't waste your time with the notes in the beginning, as I know you're here for the numbers. I just want to point out that craftable consumables are automatically refilled for the arena, so you don't have to waste time farming for them, even if you use it. Very nice for PvP. Talking about PvP, let's start with the PvP exclusive changes. Unfortunately, I was not able to find the precise number for the delay before the build-up, as this is not something labeled very clearly within the game files. It'll be easier to test it out, but I'm guessing probably something roughly 2 to 4 seconds to prevent chain CC. If anyone timed this, do comment down below. Increase poise damage of some attacks against players on the following weapon types. They really only changed a few numbers, and most of these weapons already poise broke you in a hit, even with full bull golds. Therefore, this change is targeted for these weapons to do better against enemies with hyper armor. I've screenshotted a few of the changes down below, but there's no pattern, so I've also linked the motion value sheet in the description of this video, where you can find individual values for the poise damage if you're interested, since the next few lines of the changes are also all purely poise damage related, and not too extremely significant either. It'll be easier to just look at the poise damage sheet. Power stanced weapons now deal 15% to 5% less damage. Most of the reduction are roughly around 10% reduction, but there are edge cases. And some of the lighter weapon classes also got a reduction to poise damage. The more significant ones are stuff like thrusting sword, which is more popular on your offhand than most other weapons. It now deals 88 instead of 108 poise damage in PvP. And combined with the patch note in the bug fix section at the very bottom of 1.12 patch notes, the second hit of offhand thrusting sword is greatly nerfed in terms of poise damage, from 108 to 54. Something like the curved sword also used to always stagger without hyper armor, but it seems like FromSoft has realized that if every light or medium weapon also staggered, it isn't that healthy of a PvP gameplay either. Once again, more poise damage changes. I'm sorry I'm not listing the details here, because it'll really be easier to look at the MV sheet for this part. For the next part, heavy thrusting swords got a 10% damage reduction across the board, except for critical hits like backstabs. And power stancing spears and great spears got a 15% damage reduction. I'm not too sure why it's listed separately when they already said all power stancing damage got a nerf. Maybe because people especially hate power stanced spears and great spears. Next, fists and claws received a hit stun nerf. The damage level of some fist attacks and all claw attacks for heavy running attack is reduced from damage level 2 to 1. What this means is that the hit stun is reduced from 25 frames to 10 frames. So yes, some combos are lost. Baldachin's Blessing also got a nerf. I don't think most people use these to begin with, but looking at the effects, they could potentially be problematic indeed. The numbers on screen are pre-1.12. I didn't dig too deep for this, but I'm assuming they're just trying to make sure this blessing is out of the picture. Okay, skill adjustments. Spinning Slash's PvP multiplier went from 0.8 to 0.7, which is a 12.5% damage reduction. Flaming Strike, another popular weapon art, is reduced from 0.8 to 0.65, which is a 18.75% reduction. Rain of Arrow and Radon's Rain are actually not completely nerfed like the patch note suggests. While the damage of these two skills is nerfed in PvP by 30%, their stamina damage and poise damage are actually increased. I know they said the poise damage is reduced and doesn't mention stamina damage, but yeah. They also said that Curse Blood Slice is nerfed, but as far as I can tell, it is not. It does not seem to be changed at all. Moonveil got a nerf though. The damage of both versions of the wave attack is reduced by 18.75%. They also said that Stormhawk Axe got a nerf, but it is definitely not in terms of raw poise damage. Perhaps the overlapping stun of the skill is changed somehow, but the PvP poise multiplier is not touched. And as far as I can tell, Death Ritual Spear's weapon skill wasn't nerfed either. These weapons didn't have their poise damage changed, even though I would say that these weapons are popular invasion-oriented PvP weapons, so I can understand a nerf. Maybe 1.13 will actually nerf them in a bug fix. Ancient Lightning Spear's damage is reduced as well, both the charged and uncharged versions. And Spinning Weapon has an animation change, not a numbers change. For the incantations, Black Flame Protection now only reduces physical damage by 15% in PvP, so it's the same reduction as Boiled Crab for PvP. And they finally turned Pocket Sand into Pocket Dust, so it'll be pretty hard to continuously stagger most people now. Next, some general balancing adjustments, starting with the turning speed of heavy thrusting swords. This really is talking about a tweak in the tracking changes on enemies. As for an increased dexterity scaling, this is a mistranslation. From the Japanese patch notes, what we see is an increased scaling for quality infusion. This is great, because if you've ever watched any of my weapon breakdowns, the quality section tends to be very short, as this infusion was very crap around level 150, and only turns better when you're way over leveled. They gave quality infusion a buff, but it isn't a blanket buff across weapons. They actually went ahead and tuned the base value, so it'll depend from weapon to weapon. You'll have to wait for my weapon breakdowns. Stamina consumption increased when guarding against the following weapon type, means these weapons deal more stamina damage. Here is an example for the base stamina damage changes for Great Hammer. They're roughly around 5% more stamina damage. Next, they've increased the attack speed of some weapon types. For example, the light attack of axes, both one or two-handed, have been increased by 1 frame. This also extends to the offhand. And the great axes are changed in the same way too. For the hammer, the first hit of the light attack is not sped up, but the later attacks in the chain are. Again, this applies for both one and two-handed. The flails received the same treatment as the axe too, but Reaper or Scythe users are in for a surprise. These are sped up by a whole 2 frames, which is quite significant on a medium weapon type. Reapers have special super armor. For more details, check out my Scythe breakdown. Their poise damage is comparable to halberds, and they also have a 50% shield pierce. Furthermore, a later note also stated that Reapers have increased turn speed, which means it got a buff to target tracking. All these combined might just make this weapon type quite powerful in the 1.12 era. Charged weapon damage buffed. These are some example NVs. Really not a big change, but always nice to have on weaker weapon types. Whip damage is buffed, except for the Urumi. I think this is fine, as the change is only 2.1 to 3.1% boost in AR. They just wanted to boost an underperforming weapon type. FromSoft said they increased the speed of consecutive attacks for bows, but I can't find anything on it. Sorry about that. However, it might be true though. The changed parameter for this is just difficult to get hold of. Torches have a poise damage buff from a base 5 poise damage to 5.75, so all torch attacks have a 15% increased poise damage. And for Mog's rune, unfortunately no idea here either. The Millennia one though has full details. The nerf for Crimson Flask is reduced from 30% to 15%. The heal effect of the rune is also increased. The way this works is the healing is multiplied by a motion value of the attack you hit the enemy with. So, for example, let's say you're running a colossal sword. After you take damage, you hit the enemy with a heavy attack. You will regenerate 105 HP multiplied by 130 MV, which will result in a 136 healing from the Great Rune. Attack power of ammunition is increased. This is nice, as most of the ammunition deal quite low damage, especially later into the game. Here is the full list if you want to look at them one by one. It really is a lot of changes, and mostly targeted at the weaker ammo, so you don't feel like crap when using them. Decreased turn speed for spear and great spear, so yeah, a weaker tracking for these things. Decreased poise generation speed on halberds and great spears. These refer to the attacks of these two weapons that generates hyper armor. For example, light attack number 2 for the halberd has fewer hyper armor frames. While light attack 1 looks unchanged, there's actually a hidden hyper armor change. These hyper armor used to reduce incoming poise damage by 50%, but now only reduces it by 35%. Sorcerers also got a nerf. Terra Magica was really strong, so this isn't wholly unexpected. Combined with the 5-second duration nerf on the hidden tier, FromSoft definitely doesn't like people blowing up bosses in a single cast of Comet Azure or Meteorite of Asto. Next, weapon adjustments. Troll Knight's sword got a damage increase in the form of stronger scaling for all 3 stats: strength, dexterity, and intelligence. Does that suddenly make this weapon good? I doubt it. Zammer Curved Sword got a base damage increase rather than a scaling change. Its animation movement distance is also increased, which is nice, as this is the shortest curved greatsword. Forked Hatchet got a change to all infusions, which is roughly around a 6.9% damage buff for most infusions. The Serpent Hunter got a nerf. Yes, I didn't say that's wrong. The patch note is wrong. Instead of increasing the crouch attack speed, it is reduced by 2 to 4 frames, depending on the hit. So yeah, wrong patch notes. Both Ripple weapons also received an arcane scaling reduction. These cannot be infused with an ash, but can be buffed with spells or grease. And I'm guessing the most problematic is the sleep grease, even if they're still very strong with other greases. Here are the 1.10 numbers. As you can see, the value really is quite high. Instead of giving you individual numbers though, let me make it easier to think about with a graph. The red line represents the status effect scaling for patch 1.10, and the yellow line for 1.12. The soft cap went from 45 to 30, which means that you indeed ramp up faster at lower levels, but once you hit 38 arcane points or so, you start losing out status buildup versus version 1.10. For most PvPers, this is a nerf indeed. Catalysts also got an adjustment in terms of their investment graph. These 5 catalysts have one thing in common. They use the 45-point soft cap graph. Their scaling is changed for 1.12, which is probably clearer if I drew the same box for you to compare. More power is loaded in front rather than behind, and the soft cap is actually reduced from 45 points to 43. A slightly useful note for the absolute min-maxers who need the points. As for the Prince of Death staff, it is a backloaded staff. These are the 2 graphs for 1.12 and 1.10. If you can't spot any changes, don't worry. Neither can I, since they're the same graph. My guess is they forgot that this hybrid staff does not use the 45-point soft cap curve, but the unique Prince of Death graph. So yes, this staff is not changed. Next, let's check some skill adjustments. Kick received hyper armor, which is more than fair, as this is a very niche ash. Spinning Slash got a status buildup reduction. All 3 hits combined totals to around 38.3% reduction in status buildup, which is indeed a big nerf. Storm Assault's poise generation speed is referring to how fast the hyper armor comes out. It got nerfed by 2 frames. So is the Stormcaller Ash. Exact same treatment. However, Storm Stomp is completely gutted in my opinion. The old hyper armor starts on frame 5, and now it's frame 13. While it was indeed a very strong Ash, I think this might have nerfed Storm Stomp out of why it was strong a bit too hard. Glintblade Phalanx's poise damage got sliced in half. It was strong in both PvE and PvP, but wow, this is a big nerf. A bit too much of a nerf like Flame of the Red mains in my opinion, since this weapon art's damage isn't high. Loretta's Slash, both the normal and the unique Loretta's Sickle, also got a nerf. Of course they did. I just made a video on it after all. Thankfully, it isn't a big nerf. Only a 2-frame delay for the Hyper Armor. Bloody Slash's Hyper Armor also got a 2-frame delay. Mighty Shot now shoots faster. Yet another buff for bow builds after the ammunition changes. Sky Shot and Enchanted Shot are also buffed. These were quite slow, so making the ashes feel more agile to use is nice. Parry information will have to wait. Sorry, I don't have this ready either. The flames on Blasphemous Blade deals a bit less poise damage now. Dark Moon Greatsword also got a nerf. This is definitely a nerf as the bullet's poise damage is reduced quite a bit more than the sword swing's poise damage increase. Dragon King's Crackblade is slightly nerfed only. The hit itself isn't changed, but the poise damage of the tiny poke while floating is slightly reduced. Magma Blade's Hyper Armor comes out 3 frames slower now, and the damage of Stormhawk Axe is reduced by a whole 38% or so. This is quite the nerf, but I definitely don't think you should be able to one-combo enemies to death with a well-timed Stormhawk. It was a bit too much. Bubble Shower is massively nerfed. The damage is reduced by over 50%, and the poise damage by over 67%. Granted, this thing was absolutely insane against larger targets in PvE. It might still be worth it on some large enemies that don't move too much, but it definitely is not as spectacular. Axe of Godric got a change. While there's a 7-frame nerf for the Hyper Armor startup, you get Hyper Armor for the entirety of I Command Thee Neil's follow-up attack. Bloodboon Ritual got hit hard. Granted, this was a super strong AoE weapon art when you pulled it off. The status buildup is reduced by 40% to 60%, depending on the hit, with the earlier hits taking a harder nerf. Bear Witness got a very slight buff. This really isn't that significant. You can think about it like a 3 to 5% buff at the very best. Contagious Fury got a nerf. I guess they don't really want players to get access to a strong and cheap buff, but I would have rather they tripled the FP cost instead, as you need the shield equipped for the buff to stay active. And that's it for patch 1.12. This kind of update video takes a lot of time and effort to make, so please help me out by liking and subscribing. I'm definitely operating on too little rest trying to get this out as soon as possible, and so was Cryptid Tracker. A big shout out to him for the data mine. If you want to support my work, please consider buying my fantasy novel or donating to my Patreon down below. With a book purchase, you can also request a topic from me. Krite, signing out.